My brother, along with his pregnant wife, moved into my house without my permission. They didn't pay for utilities, food, or anything else. The house was worth $700,000, and they occupied it for their future child. Hi Reddit, I'm Mark, and I'm turning 30 this year. My life's been a whirlwind lately, and I'm hoping for some perspective because things are getting overwhelming. About a year ago, I bought a house in the city for $700,000. It wasn't easy, huge mortgage, tight budget, but it felt worth it. I wanted to give my parents, Karen and Paul, the life they'd been hinting at for years. A place close to the city's entertainment where they could feel alive again. To paint the picture, I'm covering the mortgage, utilities, and all other expenses. That's over $6,000 a month. My parents don't chip in financially. They moved in saying they'd help around the house. At first, it sounded reasonable. My dad, Paul, was always handy, and my mom, Karen, was great with cooking and keeping things tidy. Or so I thought. When they moved from the suburbs, their excitement was palpable. My mom raved about the theater nearby, the restaurants, the parks. Dad was thrilled about catching baseball games just a subway ride away. I felt good, like I'd done something meaningful for them. But now, I'm not sure I made the right decision. The first few months were fine. My mom would bake on weekends, and my dad fixed the squeaky garage door and patched up some drywall. But soon, their idea of helping around the house started to fade. The novelty of city life seemed to distract them. I'd come home from work to find dishes piled in the sink, laundry half-finished, and groceries untouched. It wasn't just laziness. It felt like they didn't care. I work a demanding job in IT, often pulling 12-hour days. Coming home to chaos made me resentful, though I tried to keep it bottled up. When I finally brought it up, my mom turned it into a guilt trip. "We gave you everything, Mark. Don't you think we deserve a little relaxation now that we're older?" My dad chimed in with, "We're not young anymore, son. It's harder for us to keep up." I didn't argue. Maybe they were right. But things escalated. A few weeks later, I noticed my credit card bill was higher than usual. Turns out, my mom had been using it. She claimed it was for household necessities, but when I checked the charges, they were for theater tickets, spa visits, and even a subscription box for luxury skincare products. I confronted her, and she laughed it off. "You make enough to cover it, don't you? Besides, don't you want your mother to feel beautiful?" I was stunned. My dad backed her up, saying, "Let her have some fun, Mark. You're doing fine." That's when I started feeling like more of a bank than a son. The resentment grew, but I still couldn't bring myself to kick them out or set firm boundaries. They're my parents, after all. One evening, I got home earlier than usual. My dad wasn't there, but I could hear my mom laughing in the living room. When I walked in, she was on the phone, chatting with someone in a way that felt off. Flirty, even. She quickly hung up and gave me a forced smile. I brushed it off until a few nights later, when I overheard her on the phone again. This time, she was whispering about meeting someone for drinks. I confronted her, and she flipped the script, accusing me of eavesdropping and invading her privacy. She stormed off to her room, leaving me in a mix of anger and confusion. Around this time, my dad started disappearing for long stretches during the day. He'd say he was running errands, but when I asked for specifics, he'd get defensive. One weekend, I noticed his truck wasn't in the driveway for hours. When I asked him later, he mumbled something about catching up with an old buddy, but the vague answers made me suspicious. I decided to check our shared bank account, one they convinced me to set up for emergencies. To my shock, over $10,000 was missing. Transfers had been made to an unknown account. When I confronted both of them, they turned the blame on each other. My mom claimed Dad was gambling, while Dad accused her of spending it on her new friends. The situation spiraled when I started receiving calls from debt collectors asking for Paul. Apparently, he had taken out loans in his name and defaulted on them. I felt like my life was falling apart. Every time I tried to address the chaos, they would argue and deflect, making me question my own sanity. One night, I overheard them arguing loudly. My dad was accusing my mom of lying about her whereabouts, and she was calling him a useless burden. It was the first time I'd seen cracks in their marriage, and I didn't know how to handle it. I felt like I was drowning in their drama, all while trying to keep up with my job and the house. Things reached a boiling point when my mom invited her friends over without telling me. I came home to find a full-blown party in my living room, music blaring, drinks spilled on the couch, and strangers lounging around like they owned the place. When I confronted her, she acted like it was no big deal, saying, "We're just having fun, Mark. Don't be such a killjoy." The next day, I found out my dad had been selling tools from the garage. He claimed he needed the money to cover a few things, but I knew it was just another excuse. The tools were worth thousands, and I had no idea where the money went. I feel trapped in my own home. Every day is a new problem, a new lie, and another dollar out of my pocket. I've tried talking to them, setting boundaries, even threatening to move out myself, but nothing works. They guilt me, manipulate me, and act like I'm the bad guy for wanting some peace. Reddit, I don't know what to do. They're my parents, and I feel responsible for them, but I can't keep living like this. Is it wrong to ask them to leave? How do I even begin to untangle this mess? Life in my own house was already chaotic enough, but then things took an unexpected turn that nearly pushed me over the edge. One Thursday evening, after a grueling day at work, I came home to find my sister, Amanda, her husband, Luke, and a moving truck parked in my driveway. At first, I thought they were just visiting. Amanda is 34, married to Luke, who's 33, and they're expecting their first child. A visit would have been fine, maybe even nice, but this wasn't a visit. Amanda and Luke were unloading suitcases, boxes, and baby gear. I stared in disbelief as Amanda spotted me, waved cheerily, and said, "Hey, Mark, isn't this great? We'll be staying here for a while." Mom and Dad said it'd be no problem. No problem? I hadn't even been asked. I found my mom in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup like nothing was out of the ordinary. "What's going on? Why is Amanda moving in?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, relax, Mark," she said, barely glancing at me. "They need a place to stay. Their lease was up, and it's just until they find something new. You've got plenty of space." "This is my house," I snapped. "You didn't think to ask me before inviting them to live here?" She gave an exasperated sigh, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Amanda's pregnant, Mark. She's family. You'll hardly notice they're here." I couldn't believe it. Hardly notice? There's already enough going on without adding 2 more people, and a baby soon. "Stop being so selfish," she shot back. "We all made sacrifices for you growing up. It's your turn to give back." I was furious, but didn't want to cause a scene in front of Amanda, who had come into the kitchen to ask where they should put their stuff. Luke followed, holding a box labeled baby clothes. He gave me an awkward smile. "Thanks for letting us crash here, man. We really appreciate it." It felt like a punch to the gut. They were thanking me for something I didn't even agree to. That night, I sat in my room, stewing. My parents had already turned my house upside down, and now this? I knew I needed to set boundaries, but every time I tried, my parents guilt me into silence. Amanda and Luke moving in was just the beginning of the madness. The next morning, I woke up to chaos. Amanda had commandeered the dining room to set up her office since she worked remotely. Luke was already drilling holes in the wall of the guest room to install shelves for the baby's things. It wasn't even 8 a.m., and the house felt like a construction zone. I tried to have a calm conversation with Amanda, but she brushed me off. "We'll only be here for a couple of months, Mark. Don't stress so much." A couple of months? That wasn't what I had been told. I went to confront my mom again, but she was busy fawning over Amanda, offering her tea and asking if she needed anything. When I mentioned how this was impacting me, my mom shot me a glare. "Amanda is pregnant, Mark. Show some compassion." Luke, meanwhile, had taken over the garage. He was storing all their extra furniture there, completely ignoring the fact that I used it for my tools and car. When I pointed it out, he shrugged. "You can park in the driveway, can't you?" As the days passed, the tension in the house grew unbearable. Amanda was constantly complaining about the temperature, demanding I adjust the thermostat. Luke acted like the house was his, making decisions without consulting me. My parents, of course, took their side in every argument. Things came to a head when Amanda decided to throw a baby shower at the house without asking me. One Saturday morning, I woke up to find dozens of people I didn't know setting up decorations in the living room. There were balloons, streamers, and a table covered in presents. I pulled Amanda aside and asked what was going on. "Relax," she said with a dismissive wave. "It's just a small gathering for the baby. Mom said it'd be fine. Mom doesn't own this house." "I do," I snapped. She rolled her eyes. "Stop being such a control freak." It's one afternoon. That one afternoon turned into an all-day event, with strangers wandering through my house, eating my food, and leaving a mess for me to clean up. When I tried to express how upset I was, my dad told me to lighten up and stop being so uptight. By the time the party ended, I was at my breaking point. My house no longer felt like mine. It was overrun with people who didn't respect me or my boundaries. Every time I tried to stand up for myself, I was painted as the bad guy. I felt trapped, like I had no control over my own life. To make matters worse, Amanda and Luke started hinting that they might stay longer than planned. "The market's so tough right now," Amanda said one evening. "It might take us a while to find the right place." My parents, of course, encouraged them to stay as long as they needed. "Family comes first," my mom said pointedly, as if to remind me that my feelings didn't matter. One night, after another argument about the growing grocery bill, I finally broke down. I sat in my room, staring at the walls, wondering how things had gotten so out of hand. My parents, my sister, and Luke had completely taken over my life, and I didn't know how to fix it. It had been weeks since Amanda and Luke had moved into my house, and tensions were already high. They turned my dining room into Amanda's office, the garage into a storage unit, and my living room into a communal space for their growing collection of baby gear. I'd done my best to keep the peace, but my patience was running thin. Then Amanda dropped the bombshell. "Mark, we need to talk," she said one evening, standing in the doorway of my home office. Her tone carried that irritating air of entitlement that had become her trademark. Luke stood behind her, arms crossed, nodding like they'd rehearsed this together. "What now?" I asked, trying to keep the annoyance out of my voice. She folded her arms. "This house is too small for all of us, especially with the baby on the way. We've been thinking, and it makes the most sense for us to take the master bedroom." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "You've got to be kidding me." "I'm serious," she said, her tone unwavering. "The baby needs more space. Your room has the attached bathroom and the walk-in closet. It's perfect for us." "This is my house, Amanda," I shot back. "I pay the mortgage. I'm not giving up my room." Luke stepped in, trying to play the voice of reason. "Mark, come on. Think about it. It's not forever. Just until we find our own place." I shook my head. "No. End of discussion." Amanda's face turned sour. "I can't believe how selfish you're being. This is for the baby." "Selfish?" I barked. "You moved into my house without asking. You've taken over every other room. And now you want my bedroom? Get real." The conversation ended there, but I could tell Amanda wasn't done. She was the type to get what she wanted, no matter how underhanded she had to be. I just didn't expect her next move to be so brazen. The next day, I came home from work to find my bedroom door open and my belongings scattered in the hallway. My clothes were piled on the floor, my books stacked haphazardly on a side table, and my laptop was precariously perched on a box. Amanda was in the master bedroom, rearranging furniture with Luke's help. "What the hell is going on here?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the house. Amanda turned around, completely unfazed. "You weren't listening, so we decided to take matters into our own hands. You can't just move my stuff out of my room." I yelled, furious. "We're doing what's best for the baby," she said calmly, as if that justified everything. Luke chimed in. "It's not like we're throwing your stuff out, Mark. We just moved it to the guest room. You'll be fine." "This is my room, in my house," I said, barely keeping my temper in check. "You have no right to do this." Amanda crossed her arms. "Maybe you should think about what's right for your family instead of clinging to your precious space." My parents, of course, sided with Amanda. When I stormed downstairs to confront them, my mom had the audacity to say, "She's pregnant, Mark. She needs the space more than you do." My dad chimed in, "You're young. You can manage in a smaller room for now." I couldn't believe it. The betrayal was almost worse than the violation of my space. I felt like an outsider in my own home. No one cared about my feelings, or the fact that I was the one footing the bill for everything. Things only got worse from there. Amanda started decorating the master bedroom as if it had always been hers. She put up baby-themed wallpaper, installed a rocking chair in the corner, and filled the closet with tiny clothes and diapers. Every time I walked past the door, it felt like a slap in the face. Meanwhile, the guest room, my new room, apparently, was barely big enough for a bed and a desk. My things were crammed into boxes, and there was no room to unpack. It felt like I was living in a storage closet while Amanda and Luke played house in what was supposed to be my sanctuary. The worst part was the smug look Amanda gave me every time she saw me. She'd won, and she knew it. One evening, I tried to talk to Luke alone, hoping he'd be more reasonable without Amanda around. "Look, man, I get that you're in a tough spot," I said, "but this isn't right. You can't just take over my room." He sighed, looking genuinely uncomfortable. "I know it's not ideal, Mark, but Amanda's really stressed about the baby. I'm just trying to keep her happy. What about my happiness?" I shot back. "Does that not matter?" He didn't have an answer. The situation reached a boiling point when Amanda announced she was hosting a nursery reveal party in my house. She didn't ask me. She just told me, as if it were a done deal. "It'll be small," she said, waving off my concerns. "Just a few friends and family." I came home that Saturday to find the house filled with people I didn't know. There were decorations everywhere. Streamers, balloons, even a giant sign that said, "Welcome, baby." My living room was packed with guests, eating food I hadn't bought, using my things without permission. When I confronted Amanda, she acted like I was ruining her special day. "You need to relax, Mark. This is a happy occasion." "For who?" I snapped. "Because it sure isn't me." She rolled her eyes and walked away, leaving me fuming. That night, after the guests left and the house was finally quiet, I sat in the guest room, my makeshift bedroom, and stared at the walls. I felt completely defeated. My house didn't feel like mine anymore. It was Amanda and Luke's playground, with my parents cheering them on from the sidelines. I didn't know what to do. Every time I tried to stand up for myself, I was painted as the bad guy. Amanda's pregnancy was the ultimate trump card, and no one seemed to care about how I felt. I was trapped in a situation that seemed to have no solution. Life in my own house had become unbearable. Amanda and Luke had taken over the master bedroom, relegating me to the cramped guest room, and my parents seemed to think their actions were entirely justified. I was already seething from the invasion of my privacy, but the constant dismissal of my concerns was pushing me to my limit. One morning, after yet another sleepless night in the tiny room they had shoved me into, I went downstairs to grab coffee. Amanda was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, while Luke stood at the counter, making himself an elaborate smoothie like he owned the place. My mom was there too, doting on Amanda like she was some sort of royalty. "Morning," I muttered, heading to the coffee maker. Amanda didn't even look up. "We're running low on oat milk. Could you pick some up later?" I turned to her, barely able to contain my frustration. "Amanda, I don't drink oat milk. That's something you and Luke need to handle." My mom chimed in, clearly irritated. "Mark, she's pregnant. The least you can do is make things easier for her." I slammed the coffee pot down harder than I intended. "I'm already making things easier for her. I pay for this house. I pay for the utilities, the groceries, the repairs, everything. But that doesn't seem to matter to anyone." Amanda finally looked up, her face a mix of annoyance and entitlement. "We're family, Mark. Families help each other out. Or did you forget that?" "No," I snapped, but apparently everyone else forgot that I'm the one keeping this family afloat. I spend tens of thousands of dollars a year to keep this house running, and I don't even get the basic respect of being consulted about decisions in my own home. My dad walked into the kitchen at that moment, sipping his coffee. He must have overheard the last part because he immediately jumped in to defend Amanda. "Mark, she's pregnant. Everything we're doing is for the baby. You should be proud to help your nephew or niece have a good start in life." "That's not the point, Dad," I said, my voice rising. "The point is that no one here respects me or my boundaries. This is my house, and I've been nothing but accommodating. But enough is enough. Amanda threw her hands up in mock exasperation. You're being so dramatic. It's not like we're asking you to move out. Luke chuckled under his breath, and that was the final straw. What's so funny, Luke? I snapped, stepping closer to him. You think it's hilarious to mooch off someone else while pretending you're doing them a favor? Calm down, man, he said, raising his hands defensively. We're just trying to make the best of a tough situation. Your tough situation is your problem, not mine. I shot back. You and Amanda had no right to move into my house without asking, and you definitely don't have the right to take over my room. My mom, always quick to deflect blame, tried to mediate. Mark, you're making a big deal out of nothing. Amanda and Luke are family. Family comes first. Family comes first? I repeated, incredulous. Then why does it feel like I'm the only one sacrificing anything? Why am I the only one paying for everything while everyone else takes and takes? The room fell silent for a moment, but then Amanda, never one to back down, said, if it's such a burden for you, maybe you shouldn't have bought such an expensive house in the first place. That hit a nerve. I turned to her, my voice shaking with anger. I bought this house because I wanted to help Mom and Dad. I wanted them to be comfortable. But you've taken advantage of that, Amanda. You've turned my generosity into an excuse to walk all over me. Luke tried to intervene again, but I wasn't having it. And you, I said, pointing at him, you're just as bad. You're a grown man, Luke. Start acting like one. Stop leeching off your brother-in-law and take care of your own family. My dad, who had been quietly watching the exchange, finally spoke up. Mark, that's enough. You're being disrespectful. I laughed bitterly. Disrespectful? That's rich coming from you, Dad. Where was this energy when Amanda and Luke disrespected me by moving in without asking? Or when they took over my bedroom? Or when they hosted a party in my house without telling me? My dad looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't have a good comeback. Instead, my mom stepped in again. Mark, you're overreacting. You've always been so sensitive. Sensitive? I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Sure, let's call it sensitive when I ask for basic respect in my own home. I left the kitchen, slamming the door behind me. But the confrontation didn't end there. Later that evening, my parents called a family meeting. I reluctantly joined, expecting another round of guilt tripping. Amanda started the meeting by saying, Mark, we've been talking, and we think you're letting your stress cloud your judgment. Cloud my judgment? I repeated, barely able to believe what I was hearing. Yes, my mom said, nodding. We understand that you're under a lot of pressure, but we're all in this together. Amanda and Luke are only trying to make things better for their baby. I couldn't take it anymore. Stop using the baby as an excuse for your selfish behavior. This isn't about the baby. This is about respect, or the complete lack of it. Luke, clearly uncomfortable, tried to defuse the situation. Look, Mark, we'll start looking for a new place soon. Just give us a little more time. You should have started looking the day you moved in, I said coldly. The meeting ended with no resolution. My parents, Amanda, and Luke refused to acknowledge how much they were asking of me, or how little they were giving in return. I went back to my room, or what was left of it, and sat in silence, wondering how long I could keep living like this. The house, which I had bought to create a better life for my family, had become a prison. Every day was a new battle, and I felt like I was losing a little more of myself each time. I knew something had to change, but I didn't know where to start. I had reached my breaking point. The disrespect and entitlement from my family left me with no choice but to take drastic measures. After months of feeling like a stranger in my own home, I sat down and prepared eviction notices for Amanda, Luke, and even my parents. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but I couldn't continue living under these conditions. The papers were ready after days of research and discussions with my attorney. They were formal, clear, and left no room for negotiation. 30 days to vacate. Holding them in my hands, I felt a wave of both dread and determination. I knew what was coming next would be ugly. That evening, I gathered everyone in the living room. Amanda was scrolling on her phone. Luke was halfway through a smoothie, and my parents were watching TV. They looked annoyed as I stood in front of them, but I didn't care. This was my house, and I was taking it back. I need to talk to all of you, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. This can't go on any longer. I've tried to be patient and understanding, but none of you have respected me or my home. Amanda sighed dramatically. Oh, here we go again. No, I said firmly. This isn't another argument. I've taken legal steps to resolve this once and for all. I placed the eviction notices on the coffee table. The room went silent as their eyes scanned the papers. My dad leaned forward, frowning deeply, while Amanda's expression shifted from confusion to fury. Luke sat frozen, staring at the papers as if they might disappear. You're kicking us out? Amanda finally said, her voice dripping with indignation. I'm giving you 30 days to leave, I replied. That includes all of you, Amanda, Luke, and Mom and Dad. Luke shook his head, clearly trying to process what was happening. Mark, come on. We're family. You can't seriously be doing this. Family doesn't treat each other like this. I shot back. You've taken over my home, disrespected me at every turn, and acted like I don't matter. I've had enough. Amanda stood up, her face flushed with anger. This is about the baby. We're trying to make things better for our child. You're being completely selfish. I laughed bitterly. Selfish? You've commandeered my bedroom, trashed my living space, and treated me like a second-class citizen in my own house. Don't talk to me about selfishness. My mom chimed in, her voice trembling. Mark, how could you do this to us? We're your family. We raised you. We've always been there for you. Really? I said, my frustration boiling over. Because I don't feel supported at all. I feel like a bank, a servant, and a punching bag. You've all taken advantage of my generosity, and I'm done. Amanda crossed her arms. So you're just throwing us out? A pregnant woman? What kind of person does that? The kind of person who's had enough, I replied. You should have thought about this before you moved in without asking, before you took my bedroom, and before you decided my feelings didn't matter. Luke finally spoke, his voice quieter than usual. Mark, I get that you're upset, but this is a little extreme. Couldn't we work something out? Maybe start paying rent or something? You've been here for months without paying a dime, I said, glaring at him. If you wanted to contribute, you should have done it a long time ago. It's too late for that now. My dad, who had been sitting quietly up until this point, finally spoke. You're going to regret this, Mark. Family is supposed to stick together. This will tear us apart. I looked him in the eye and said, maybe it already has. You've all made it clear that my boundaries and feelings don't matter. I'm just supposed to keep giving while you take. Well, that stops now. Amanda stormed out of the room, muttering under her breath about how heartless I was. Luke followed her, shooting me a disappointed look on his way out. My mom started crying, accusing me of being ungrateful and cruel, while my dad shook his head in disapproval. For the next few days, the atmosphere in the house was tense. Amanda and Luke avoided me entirely, while my parents oscillated between guilt-tripping me and giving me the silent treatment. But I didn't waver. The eviction notices were clear, and I wasn't backing down. As the days passed, Amanda and Luke began packing up their things, though not without complaints. You'll regret this, Mark, Amanda said one day as she carried a box out of the house. When the baby's born, don't expect to be part of their life. I didn't respond. There was no point in arguing anymore. My decision was made, and I wasn't going to be manipulated by empty threats. By the time the 30-day deadline arrived, the house was finally quiet. Amanda and Luke had left, and my parents had grudgingly moved into a small apartment nearby. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the outcome I had wanted, but it was the one I needed. My house was mine again, and I was determined to rebuild my life on my own terms. The day Amanda and Luke left marked a turning point. They packed their belongings into their car with a tense silence hanging over the driveway. Amanda's frustration was obvious as she muttered under her breath, while Luke tried to keep things calm. Watching them drive away brought a strange mix of relief and sadness. The house was finally quiet, but the emotional weight of everything that had happened still lingered. In the days following their departure, the tension with my parents remained thick. My mom stayed mostly in her room or busied herself with chores, avoiding me altogether. My dad acted indifferent, but couldn't hide the occasional disappointed looks he cast in my direction. It was clear they were struggling to come to terms with the changes, and I wasn't sure if things would ever feel normal again. One evening, as I sat in the living room, the silence was broken when my mom walked in. She looked hesitant, her hands fidgeting nervously. She stopped a few feet away, as though unsure of how to start. "Mark," she said softly, "I need to say something." I set down the remote and turned to face her. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, her eyes looking everywhere but at me. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened, about how we treated you, how I treated you, and I just want to apologize." The words caught me off guard. I sat up straighter, searching her face for sincerity. "Mom, you don't have to." She cut me off, shaking her head. "No, I do. We pushed you too far, ignored your feelings, and treated this house like it wasn't yours. That wasn't fair. You've done so much for us, and we didn't show you the respect you deserve." Hearing her say those words felt like a weight lifting off my chest. For months, I had been carrying the resentment of feeling overlooked and unappreciated. Seeing the regret in her eyes made it clear she finally understood the toll it had taken on me. "I appreciate that, Mom," I said. I felt like I didn't matter anymore. I wanted to help you and Dad, but it got to a point where I couldn't even recognize my own life." She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know. I see that now, and I'm sorry, Mark. I promise I'll do better from now on." "We'll do better." Over the following days, I noticed a shift in her behavior. She started asking for my input on decisions, something she had rarely done before. She also made a point of helping more around the house, cooking meals, organizing spaces, and even managing the grocery shopping. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, but it was enough to show she was serious about her promise. My dad, however, took longer to come around. His disapproval lingered, visible in his sharp glances and occasional grumbled comments about how family should stick together. One night, as I sat reading in the living room, I decided to address it head-on. "Dad," I said, setting my book aside, "can we talk for a minute?" He looked up from his spot on the couch, clearly reluctant. "What about?" "I just want to clear the air," I replied. "I know you're upset about what happened with Amanda and Luke, but I need you to understand why I did what I did." He sighed heavily, setting down his coffee mug. "Mark, I don't agree with how you handled it. Amanda's pregnant, and kicking them out felt harsh." I leaned forward, keeping my tone calm. "I get that it seems harsh, but they disrespected me and my home from the moment they moved in. I tried talking to everyone, setting boundaries, and being patient, but nothing changed. I had no choice." "You always have a choice," he said gruffly, though his voice lacked conviction. "Dad, if someone treated you like that in your own house, what would you have done?" I asked. He didn't answer right away, his gaze fixed on the coffee table. After a long pause, he finally said, "Maybe I didn't want to see it because it's easier to blame you than admit we were wrong." The admission caught me off guard. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was as close as my dad ever got to one. I nodded, not wanting to push further. "I just hope you understand why I had to draw the line." He nodded back, and though the tension didn't vanish completely, it felt like a step in the right direction. Meanwhile, Amanda and Luke were adjusting to their new reality. They had moved into a nearby motel after struggling to find an apartment. From what I heard through family friends, Amanda was furious about the situation and made no effort to hide her resentment toward me. Luke, on the other hand, seemed resigned to their circumstances. He left me a voicemail once, saying, "I understand why you did it. No hard feelings," though I wasn't sure if he really meant it. Eventually, they managed to secure an apartment for $2,500 a month. It wasn't as spacious or comfortable as they had hoped, but it was their own space. While I didn't hear from them directly, I hoped the distance would give them time to reflect on everything that had happened. As the weeks passed, the house began to feel like mine again. My parents started making a genuine effort to respect my boundaries, and the changes were noticeable. My mom even left me a note on the kitchen counter one morning, which read, "Mark, thank you for everything you've done for us. We realize now how much we've taken for granted, and we're so sorry for the stress we caused you. We're proud of you, and we promise to do better. Love, Mom." Reading those words brought a lump to my throat. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. While the scars from everything that had happened would take time to heal, I was hopeful that we could move forward as a family, this time, with mutual respect and understanding. When Amanda and Luke left, the house felt empty, but not entirely peaceful. Their departure marked the end of constant noise and conflict, but the strain they left behind lingered. The physical space they had occupied still bore their imprint, and emotionally, I felt the weight of unresolved issues with my parents. The first step toward normalcy was reclaiming my home. The master bedroom, which Amanda and Luke had taken over, was the most glaring reminder of their time there. Walking into the room was unsettling. The baby-themed wallpaper Amanda had insisted on still covered the walls, and a rocking chair sat in the corner, surrounded by a pile of things they hadn't bothered to take. I spent the weekend restoring the space. The wallpaper came down, every item they left was removed, and I repainted the walls in a color that felt like me, something neutral and calming. Moving my belongings back in was symbolic, almost therapeutic. It was more than just redecorating. It was about reclaiming control and putting my life back in order. The living room was next. It had been overrun with their things, baby gear, clutter, and the remnants of Amanda's so-called nursery planning. Clearing it out was a slow process, but as I made progress, the space began to feel more like a home again. For the first time in months, I could sit on the couch without feeling like I was in someone else's space. While I worked on the house, the tension with my parents hung in the background. My mom avoided me, keeping herself busy in the kitchen or retreating to her room, while my dad was distant and curt. The atmosphere was heavy, and I knew we needed to address it eventually. One evening, as I was putting away dishes, my mom walked into the kitchen. She hesitated, standing by the counter as if unsure how to start. Finally, she spoke. "Mark, I've been thinking about everything that's happened." I turned to face her, sensing this wasn't going to be an ordinary conversation. "What about?" She sighed, her hands fidgeting. "About how we treated you. I want to say I'm sorry. We put so much pressure on you, ignored your boundaries, and didn't stop to think about how much we were asking of you. It wasn't fair." Hearing her say that took me by surprise. For months, I had felt like my feelings were dismissed or ignored entirely. Now, seeing her acknowledge that was both validating and emotional. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied. "I've been carrying a lot, and it felt like no one saw it. I just needed respect and consideration, things I didn't feel like I was getting." She nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I see that now. I think we were so focused on Amanda and the baby that we lost sight of what you were going through. I'm sorry for that, Mark. I really am." My dad entered the room then, clearly having overheard part of the conversation. He stood silently for a moment before speaking. "Your mom's right. I wasn't fair to you either. I kept thinking of what Amanda needed and didn't stop to think about how it was affecting you. That was wrong." His admission surprised me even more than my mom's apology. My dad wasn't the type to acknowledge mistakes easily, and hearing him take responsibility was unexpected. "I just hope we can move forward," I said, my voice softer now. "I don't want to keep carrying this resentment. I just need us to respect each other and this space." Both of them nodded in agreement, and for the first time in months, it felt like we were on the same page. The tension in the house didn't vanish overnight, but this conversation was a step in the right direction.